The pen hovered over the prenuptial agreement. Across the mahogany desk sat a woman in a $1,000 suit, eyes cold as winter steel, waiting. He was just her IT guy, the single dad who fixed her servers and counted pennies for his daughter's surgery. She needed a husband on paper to escape a monster in a tailored suit. He needed $50,000 before Friday. The contract was clinical, transactional, insulting. "Sign here," she said, sliding the document forward with one manicured finger. "This protects my assets from complications." Her pause hung heavy with unspoken judgment. He signed without a word, his calloused hand steady, despite the humiliation burning in his chest. She had no idea who she'd just made sign that prenup. As ink dried on paper, two strangers became husband and wife. Neither knew this convenient lie would cost them more than any contract could protect. 24 hours earlier, Russell Hayes had been on his knees under a desk on the 40th floor, routing cables through a mess of tangled wires. His daughter's medical bills sat heavy in his back pocket, folded into a square that had worn soft from checking and rechecking the numbers. The surgery was scheduled for Monday. The deposit was due Friday. He was $17,000 short, and overtime wouldn't bridge that canyon. Above him, heels clicked across marble floors. He didn't look up. People like Christina Vaughn didn't notice people like him unless something stopped working. Christina Vaughn had built Apex Solutions from a startup in her garage to a company worth $300 million in 8 years. She was 34, brilliant, and utterly alone in a glass tower of her own making. Her father had arranged her engagement to Gerald Ashford. Old money, old name, old cruelty hidden behind a politician's smile. Gerald had been investigated twice for fraud, once for assault, but his lawyers were better than the evidence. Her father saw dollar signs and legacy. Christina saw a cage closing around her throat. She had 3 weeks until the engagement party. 3 weeks to find a way out that wouldn't destroy everything she'd built. The idea came to her at 2 a.m, staring at corporate law documents and sipping cold coffee. A marriage would nullify the arrangement. Not a real marriage, just paper, just strategy. Someone who needed something badly enough to keep quiet. Someone with nothing to lose who wouldn't try to take anything from her. Someone invisible. She thought of the IT guy who'd fixed her system last month, the one who never made eye contact, who smelled like cheap detergent and always left before anyone could start a conversation. She'd overheard him on the phone once, talking about medical bills and payment plans. Desperation made people agreeable. Desperation made them safe. Russell was replacing a burnt-out router when Christina's assistant summoned him to the executive suite. He wiped grease from his hands and took the service elevator, confusion knotting his stomach. Executives didn't call for him. They called for his boss, who sent him to do the actual work. The office was all glass and steel, city lights glittering 40 stories below like fallen stars. Christina sat behind her desk, fingers steepled, expression unreadable. She didn't offer him a seat. "I have a proposition," she said, and the words that followed felt like falling through ice into black water. $50,000, a marriage license, 1 year of pretending to be her husband in public. Separate bedrooms, separate lives, a prenuptial agreement that made it clear he'd walk away with exactly what he came with. Nothing. She spoke like she was negotiating a software contract, all clauses and contingencies. He thought of Kennedy's face, pale against hospital sheets, trusting him to make everything okay the way he always did. His daughter was 7 years old and believed her father could fix anything. This would prove her right or make him a liar forever. He heard himself agree before his brain caught up to his mouth. The lawyer arrived within an hour, a sharp-eyed woman who clearly thought this was the strangest retainer she'd ever earned. The prenuptial agreement was 15 pages of legal protection against a threat that didn't exist. Russell Hayes owned a 12-year-old sedan, $700 in checking, and debt that would take 5 years to clear. Christina's assets were listed in cold precision. Properties, investments, business interests worth more than he'd make in 10 lifetimes. The irony sat bitter on his tongue. Once documents like this would have had his name on the other side, protecting fortunes his signature could command with a phone call. But that Russell Hayes was dead, buried under grief and choices that couldn't be unmade. He signed on page 15, where the lawyer's lacquered fingernail pointed. Christina signed with a fountain pen that probably cost more than his rent. They went to City Hall at 8 the next morning, two strangers in a line of nervous couples who actually loved each other. The clerk was bored, the ceremony mechanical. Christina wore sunglasses indoors. Russell wore the only dress shirt he owned that didn't have a frayed collar. When the clerk pronounced them husband and wife, neither moved to kiss. They walked out into October sunlight as Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, a lie notarized and legal. The money appeared in his account before noon. Kennedy's surgery was confirmed for Monday. He'd sold his pride for his daughter's life, and he'd do it again without hesitation. Christina's penthouse was a museum of expensive emptiness. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a city that glittered with indifference. Everything was white or chrome or glass, beautiful, cold, untouched. She showed him to the guest room with the air of a hotel manager showing a tourist to budget accommodations. The room was larger than his entire apartment, with a bathroom that had heated floors and a shower with 6 nozzles. A closet held clothes in his size, tags still attached, chosen by someone who'd guessed his measurements from surveillance footage. "We have a public appearance Friday night," she said from the doorway. "My family's charity gala. We need to look convincing." She left before he could ask what convincing looked like to people who lived in penthouses. Kennedy's surgery lasted 6 hours. Russell sat in a waiting room that smelled like antiseptic and fear, scrolling through his phone without seeing anything. Christina appeared at hour 4 with coffee and a croissant he couldn't eat. She didn't speak, just sat 3 chairs away, checking emails on her phone. When the surgeon finally emerged with good news, relief hit Russell like a physical blow. He put his face in his hands and felt his shoulders shake. Christina's hand landed on his back, awkward, unpracticed, there for 5 seconds before she pulled away. "Your daughter is strong," she said quietly. "Like her father." It was the first kind thing she'd said to him. He didn't know how to respond, so he just nodded. The charity gala was a battlefield in evening wear. Christina appeared in a dress that probably cost more than the surgery, diamonds at her throat, her mask of controlled perfection firmly in place. Russell wore a rented tuxedo that pinched at the shoulders. She took his arm at the entrance, her fingers cold through the fabric. "Smile," she murmured. "You're madly in love with me." He smiled. It felt like lying in a language he'd forgotten how to speak. Inside, crystal chandeliers threw light across a ballroom full of people who measured worth in portfolio size. Her father approached like a battleship, all stern disapproval and calculating eyes. Gerald Ashford trailed behind, his smile not reaching his eyes, watching Christina like a possession that had tried to escape. "This is unexpected," her father said, the pause loaded with judgment. His gaze raked over Russell with the subtlety of a home inspector finding mold. Christina didn't mention she was seeing anyone. Christina's hand tightened on Russell's arm, a lifeline or a warning. "It was quick," she said, her voice steady as steel. "When you know, you know." Gerald's smile curdled at the edges. "How modern," he said, the word dripping with disdain. "And what do you do, Mr. Hayes?" Russell supplied. "IT support." The temperature around them dropped 10 degrees. Gerald laughed, actually laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "Well," he said, looking at Christina with something ugly moving behind his eyes. "I suppose everyone needs a hobby. They lasted another hour before Christina pleaded a headache and pulled him toward the exit. In the car, silence sat heavy between them. Russell watched the city blur past, neon and shadow. "I'm sorry," Christina said finally, staring straight ahead. They were... She couldn't finish. Russell thought about men in expensive suits who thought money made them gods. He'd grown up around men like Gerald Ashford, had been one in another life. "Your father arranged that marriage for business," he said quietly. "Gerald Ashford has 6 shell companies under investigation and needs your reputation to stay clean. Your marriage would have been a press release for his credibility." Christina's head snapped toward him. "How do you know that?" He met her eyes in the rearview mirror. "I read." Something shifted between them after that night. Not friendship exactly, but the beginning of something less hostile than their arrangement suggested. Christina started coming home earlier, appearing in the kitchen where Russell cooked simple meals that filled the sterile apartment with unexpected warmth. She'd hover in the doorway, uncertain, until he'd set a second plate without asking if she wanted one. They ate in silence at first, then in fragments of conversation that grew longer each night. She asked about Kennedy. He asked about her company. Neither talked about the parts of their lives that hurt too much to examine. It was careful, this détente, like 2 wounded animals circling each other, waiting to see who'd bite first. Kennedy came home after a week, pale but smiling, convinced her father had married a princess because that was the only explanation for a penthouse and a room bigger than their apartment. Christina found herself drawn to the child, despite every intention to maintain distance. Kennedy had her father's quiet strength and a way of looking at the world like it was full of puzzles to solve. She asked questions Christina had forgotten how to answer. Why the sky changed colors, what made stars burn, whether penguins ever got lonely. "Do you love my daddy?" Kennedy asked one afternoon, crayons scattered across Christina's marble coffee table in a riot of color that would have horrified her a month ago. Christina looked at Russell, who'd frozen in the kitchen doorway, dish towel in hand. "Yes," Christina said, surprised to find the lie stuck in her throat. "I do." The kiss happened on a Tuesday. 3 months into their arrangement, standing in the kitchen over a pot of pasta that was about to boil over. Christina reached for the handle at the same moment Russell did. Their hands collided. He pulled back. She didn't. The air between them changed, charged with something neither wanted to name. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For staying, for Kennedy, for making this place feel less empty." Russell looked at her, really looked, and saw past the CEO armor to the woman underneath. Lonely, brilliant, terrified of needing anyone. "Christina," he said, and her name in his mouth sounded like something precious. She kissed him, soft, questioning, tasting like wine and vulnerability. He kissed her back, and the careful walls they'd built collapsed into dust. They didn't talk about it, not that night, not the next morning when they passed each other in the hallway with careful politeness. But something had broken open that couldn't be sealed again. Russell found himself watching her when she worked, the way she bit her lower lip when concentrating, how she kicked off her heels the moment she came home. Christina caught herself listening for his key in the lock, the sound of his voice reading to Kennedy before bed, the way he hummed old songs while cooking. They were falling, both of them, through a trap door in their careful arrangement. It was terrifying. It felt like drowning and learning to breathe underwater at the same time. Gerald Ashford didn't take rejection gracefully. The articles started appearing in business publications. Hints about Christina's sudden marriage, questions about her judgment, whispers about her company's stability. Anonymous sources suggested Apex Solutions was overvalued, that investors were nervous, that the board might consider new leadership. Christina came home one evening with her mask cracked exhaustion bleeding through. "He's destroying everything," she said, dropping her briefcase like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Every contract I'm close to closing suddenly has concerns. Every investor is hearing rumors. He's burning it all down because I said no." Russell watched her pace, fury and fear in every movement. He knew that desperation had worn it once when his own family tried to control his life through economic warfare. "Let me help," he said. Christina laughed, bitter. "How? No offense, Russell, but this is corporate warfare. I need lawyers and leverage and information," he finished. "Gerald's companies are under investigation. Those investigations need evidence. I know people who know how to find evidence that's been hidden." She stopped pacing. "What people? You're an IT technician." The words hung between them, a challenge and a question. Russell had kept his past locked away for 3 years, buried under a different name and a life so far from his origin it might as well have been fiction. But Christina was drowning, and he was tired of pretending he didn't know how to swim in these waters. "I used to be someone else," he said carefully. "Before Kennedy. Before—" he couldn't say it, before everything fell apart. "I know how men like Gerald operate, because I grew up in that world." The truth came out in pieces, like shrapnel being extracted from a wound. His family, the Hayes family, old money that made Gerald's fortune look like pocket change. The rebellion, marrying Lauren against their wishes because she was a teacher's daughter, because she loved him without knowing his portfolio size. The ultimatum, the trust fund he'd walked away from. Kennedy born in a 2-bedroom apartment on a teacher's salary and Russell's pride. Lauren getting sick, cancer moving fast, the insurance that didn't cover experimental treatments that might have saved her. Watching her die knowing he could have saved her with one phone call to his father. Living with that choice every day since. Christina listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. "Your family is the Hayes family," she said finally. "As in Hayes Industrial, Hayes Financial Group, the Hayes Foundation." Russell nodded. "My father is Frederick Hayes. I'm his only child. When he passes, I inherit everything. Currently sitting at approximately $1.2 billion. The number sat between them like a bomb. Christina laughed, a sound caught between hysteria and disbelief. "You let me give you a prenup? You let me— God, Russell, I made you sign away rights to my assets when you could buy my entire company as a rounding error." "It's not my money," he said quietly. "I walked away. That was the choice. But it will be yours. Eventually." He met her eyes. "I don't want it. I wanted a simple life with Lauren. Now I want Kennedy to grow up without that weight, without the expectations and the corruption and the— But Gerald Ashford is destroying my company, and you have the power to stop it with one phone call." Her voice was sharp, cutting. "And you're just going to let it happen because of pride?" Russell stood. "It's not pride, it's principle. I watched that money kill my mother with pressure and pills. I watched my father trade marriages like stocks. I watched men like Gerald use wealth as a weapon, crushing anyone who— I'm anyone," Christina interrupted, standing to face him. "I'm being crushed right now, and you have the power to help. But you won't because 3 years ago you made a choice. Well, I didn't choose this. I didn't choose Gerald targeting my company. I didn't choose my father selling me like property. I built something real, something mine, and it's being destroyed while you stand there talking about principles." Her voice cracked on the last word. Tears tracked through her makeup, the first time he'd seen her cry. "I can't lose this, Russell. It's all I have." He thought about Lauren in those final days, holding his hand, telling him she didn't regret anything, even though they both knew what his pride had cost them. He thought about Kennedy asking if her mother would have liked their new home, whether she'd be proud of them. He thought about the man he'd been versus the man he'd tried to become. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. One phone call, Christina whispered. Just one. Not for money. For information. For a chance to fight back. Russell looked at her, his wife on paper, something more complicated in reality, and felt the last wall crumble. One phone call, he agreed. But after this, that part of my life stays buried. Kennedy never knows. We never speak of it again. Christina nodded, relief flooding her features. She didn't know what that phone call would cost him. Neither did he. Frederick Hayes answered on the third ring. Russell! His father's voice was aged but sharp, scalpel-edged with old anger. 3 years of silence, and now you call. Should I assume you're finally ready to come home? Russell closed his eyes, the penthouse office suddenly feeling like a confessional. I need information on Gerald Ashford. Financial, personal, anything that can stop him from destroying someone I care about. The silence stretched long enough that Russell thought the line had gone dead. You need my help, Frederick said finally, something like satisfaction in his tone. The great rebel needs the family he abandoned. Don't, Russell warned. Just tell me if you'll help or not. Of course I'll help. You're my son. You've always been my son, even when you were too foolish to remember that. Russell heard the unspoken cost building in his father's words like thunder before lightning. What do you want? Dinner. You, your daughter, and your wife, is it? I hear you married. How delightfully unexpected. Russell agreed because he had no choice. Christina's company was bleeding. The board was panicking. Investors were fleeing. Within 48 hours, Frederick Hayes delivered a file 3 inches thick. Gerald Ashford's empire was a house of cards built on fraud, money laundering, and 3 offshore accounts that connected to organized crime. The evidence was pristine, damning, enough to bury him in federal prison for 20 years. Christina stared at the documents spread across her dining table like she was looking at salvation written in ink. How did he get this in 2 days? She asked. Russell didn't answer. They both knew some questions were better left unexamined. They delivered the evidence to the FBI anonymously. Gerald was arrested at his office. Perp walked past cameras in handcuffs. Her father called, rage shaking his voice, accusing her of destroying a valuable alliance. Christina hung up on him mid-sentence, the sound of her breaking free ringing like broken chains. But freedom had a price, and Frederick Hayes collected debts with interest. The dinner invitation became a summons. Kennedy was excited, believing she was meeting her grandfather for the first time. Christina prepared like a soldier entering battle, armor dress and perfect hair. Russell felt himself sliding back into patterns he'd spent 3 years unlearning. The posture, the speech patterns, the mask of casual wealth. The Hayes estate sprawled across 20 acres of manicured perfection. Frederick waited in a dining room designed to intimidate, oil paintings of ancestors staring down in judgment. He was 72, silver-haired, sharp as a knife that had never dulled. His eyes went to Kennedy first. My granddaughter, he said, something softening in his face. You have your grandmother's eyes. Dinner was a performance. Frederick played the gracious patriarch, asking Kennedy about school, about her interests, about her father's new wife. Kennedy answered with innocent honesty that cut deeper than any weapon. Daddy says we were sad before, but now we're happy, she said, reaching for Christina's hand across the table. Christina makes really good pancakes, and she's teaching me about business, and sometimes she tells me stories about my mom from when they talk at night. Russell's heart stopped. Christina had been asking about Lauren, learning about the woman whose ghost had haunted their arrangement. Frederick's gaze moved between them, reading the subtext like the expert predator he was. How touching, he said. Russell always did have a gift for finding women who see past the obvious. The barb landed. Lauren had seen past his wealth to the man underneath. Christina had seen past his poverty to the man he'd become. Which brings us to why I helped you. Frederick continued, setting down his wine glass with deliberate care. I'm dying, Frederick said, and the words sucked oxygen from the room. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe 8. My legacy sits in offshore accounts and corporate holdings, waiting for an heir who's been playing at poverty for 3 years. Russell felt the trap closing. I don't want your money, he said. Frederick smiled, cold. Not about what you want, son. It's about responsibility, about family, about ensuring everything I built doesn't end up in government hands or divided among vultures. He looked at Kennedy, calculation in every line of his face. It's about your daughter's future. My granddaughter deserves better than government housing and public schools. She deserves her birthright. She deserves a father who's there, Russell shot back, not buried in boardrooms and obligation. I lived that childhood. I won't do that to her. Noble, Frederick said, also foolish. You think you're protecting her from wealth. You're protecting her from power, from the ability to shape the world instead of being shaped by it. You're making her a victim of your trauma. The words hit like acid. Christina's hand found Russell's under the table, grounding him. Mr. Hayes, she said, her CEO voice cutting clean through the tension. With respect, Russell isn't the one who made wealth traumatic in this family. That was your choice. Frederick's eyes shifted to her, reassessing. Bold. I can see why my son married you. He didn't marry me for love, Christina said, and Russell felt his heart crack at the past tense. He married me to save my company and help his daughter. But somewhere in this arrangement, we became something real, and that's worth more than any inheritance. Frederick leaned back, studying them both. Pretty speech, but reality is coming whether you accept it or not. In 6 months, Russell inherits everything. The question is whether he'll be prepared to manage it or whether incompetence will destroy 3 generations of work. They left before dessert. Kennedy fell asleep in the car, exhausted from meeting her grandfather. Christina drove in silence, city lights streaming past. He's right, Russell said finally. I can't just ignore it. The money will come whether I want it or not. So don't ignore it, Christina replied. But don't let it define you either. You're not the same person you were at 25. I watched my pride kill my wife. The confession tore out of him. Every day I wonder if I'd called them sooner, begged harder, whether Lauren would still be alive, whether I traded her life for my principles. Christina pulled over, put the car in park, turned to face him. You made the choice you could live with. Lauren knew that. She married you knowing your family would cut you off. That was her choice too. I loved her, Russell said, needing Christina to understand. I still love her. I know, Christina said softly. I'm not asking you to stop. I'm just asking you to make room for more than grief. The kiss was different this time, slower, sadder, weighted with the knowledge that their arrangement had become something neither had planned. What are we doing? Russell asked against her lips. I don't know, Christina admitted. But I don't want to stop. They drove home in silence, Kennedy breathing softly in the back seat, 2 damaged people learning to hold on to something fragile and real. The company recovered. Gerald's arrest sent shockwaves through the business community, vindicating Christina's decisions. The board apologized. Investors returned. Contracts closed. Apex Solutions climbed 10% in valuation in 2 months. Christina's father tried to reconcile, wanting back into her life now that she'd proven her power. She declined with the kind of gracious professionalism that cut deeper than anger. Russell watched her thrive, wondered if she still needed the protection of their arrangement, if she needed him at all now that the crisis had passed. The year's almost up, he said one evening, the prenup sitting on the counter between them like evidence. Our agreement. Christina looked at the document like it was a foreign object. Right, the agreement. You're safe now, Russell continued, hating every word. Gerald's in prison. Your father has no leverage. You don't need a fake husband anymore. Is that what you think this is? Christina asked, something dangerous in her voice. Still fake? Russell gestured helplessly at the space between them. You married me for protection. I married you for money. Those were the terms. Those were the terms 300 days ago. Christina snapped. Before you made this place feel like home, before Kennedy started calling me her bonus mom, before I fell in love with you, you absolute idiot! The words hung in the air like something fragile and explosive. Russell stared at her. You... what? Christina laughed, shaky. I love you. I love the way you burn toast every morning. I love how you read to Kennedy with different voices for each character. I love that you gave up $1 billion because your principles matter more than comfort. I love that you saved my company even though it cost you your peace. I'm in love with you, and I have been for months. And if you want to walk away now that the agreement is done, then I need you to say it so I can start learning how to breathe without you. Russell crossed the space between them in 3 steps, pulling her against him like she was oxygen. I love you, he said into her hair. I didn't think I could again. After Lauren. Didn't think I deserved to. But you're brilliant and strong, and you make Kennedy laugh. And somewhere in playing, pretend I fell so hard I forgot we were acting. Christina pulled back to look at him, tears on her cheeks and joy in her eyes. So we're doing this? For real? For real, Russell confirmed. No contract, no prenup. Just us figuring it out as we go. She kissed him, deep and claiming, tasting like hope and coffee and the future they were choosing. One condition, she said against his mouth. What? We rip up that prenup? I never want to see that insulting document again. Russell reached for the papers and tore them in half, then quarters, confetti of legal protection scattered across marble floors. Deal! Frederick Hayes died 4 months later, quietly in his sleep at the estate. The funeral was massive, attended by politicians and CEOs and people who'd never met him but knew his name meant power. Russell stood at the graveside with Kennedy on one side and Christina on the other, mourning the father he'd had and the relationship they'd never managed to repair. The will was read a week later, $1.2 billion, divided into trusts, properties, and holdings that would require a team of lawyers and accountants to fully understand. Russell inherited it all, along with seats on 12 boards and responsibility for 300 employees across 5 companies. The weight of it settled on his shoulders like gravity doubling. I don't know how to do this, he admitted to Christina that night, paperwork spread across every surface of their home office. I spent 3 years running from this, and now I'm drowning in it. Christina sat on the edge of his desk, taking his face in her hands. Then we do it together. You're not alone anymore. I could destroy all of it, he said. Make the wrong decision, and cost hundreds of people their jobs. Or you could make the right decisions and build something better than your father did, Christina countered. Use that money the way you've always wanted to, without the corruption, without the cruelty. Prove that wealth and principles aren't mutually exclusive. Russell looked at her, his wife, his partner, the woman who'd started as a desperate arrangement and become his foundation. We're really doing this? Building a life together? We already did, Christina said, smiling. The rest is just details. They restructured everything. Russell took control of Hayes Industries with Christina as his strategic advisor. They cleaned house, fired executives who'd enabled his father's questionable practices, implemented oversight, redirected profits toward ethical investments. It wasn't easy. There were fights with board members, threats from people who preferred the old regime, late nights and early mornings, and the constant weight of responsibility. But they built something neither could have built alone. Kennedy grew up in penthouses and boardrooms, learning that wealth meant responsibility, that power meant service. Christina's company merged with Hayes Financial, creating an empire built on transparency and innovation. Russell's principles met Christina's brilliance, and together they proved that success didn't require selling your soul. 3 years after that prenuptial agreement, they stood in a garden overlooking the city, surrounded by friends who'd become family. Kennedy was flower girl, scattering petals in serious concentration. This time there was no contract, no protection, no careful clauses, just vows spoken in sunlight, promises made without escape plans. "I love you," Russell said. "Not because you needed saving or because I needed saving, but because you make every day better than the one before." Christina smiled through happy tears. "I love you," she replied, "not because of what you have or who you were, but because of who you choose to be every single day." They kissed as husband and wife, again, for real this time, and the applause that followed sounded like beginning instead of ending. The prenup had been insulting, transactional, clinical. It had also been the beginning of everything that mattered. Two strangers had signed a piece of paper to save themselves and ended up saving each other instead. Christina had made the single dad sign away rights to protect her assets, never knowing he had more wealth than she could imagine. But in the end, the money didn't matter. The inheritance didn't matter. What mattered was the family they'd built from a foundation of mutual desperation and desperate hope. What mattered was learning that love didn't require contracts, that trust couldn't be notarized, that the best partnerships were the ones you never saw coming. Russell Hayes had walked away from $1 billion once to marry for love. He'd gained it back by learning to love again. And standing there with Christina's hand in his and Kennedy's laughter in his ears, he finally understood what his father never had. Wealth wasn't measured in dollars or properties or corporate holdings. It was measured in moments like this, imperfect, messy, absolutely real. That was the inheritance that mattered. That was what he'd pass down to Kennedy. Not money, not power, but the knowledge that the best things in life couldn't be protected by prenups or purchased with portfolios. They could only be built, one honest day at a time, with people brave enough to let their careful walls crumble into dust. Some fairy tales started with once upon a time. This one started with a humiliating contract and a desperate bargain. But the ending was the same. Two people finding their way to happily ever after, not despite the odds, but because they'd been brave enough to bet on each other when logic said to walk away. The prenup was long gone, torn into confetti and swept away. But the marriage it had begun survived, thrived, became the foundation for everything beautiful that followed. Christina had thought she was protecting her assets. Russell had thought he was saving his daughter. Neither had known they were actually saving themselves. That was the real story. Not about money or contracts or convenient arrangements. It was about two broken people learning to be whole together, about finding family in unexpected places, about discovering that sometimes the best things in life start with the worst ideas. They lived happily, not perfectly, with arguments and compromises and the beautiful mess of building a life together. And every year on their anniversary, they toasted to that ridiculous prenup. The insult that became an invitation, the protection that became a promise, the contract that taught them love was the one thing that could never be notarized, negotiated, or contained.